everybody, welcome to Watercolor Cocktail Hour. I'm going to demo a little rosé spritzer and then we're going to paint some spring flowers. Alright, so for the drink, this is such a fun spring or even summer drink. You're going to start with a little bit of rosé wine, about 3 or 4 ounces, doing about half of my cup. And then I'm going to add some seltzer, about 2 ounces, just plain seltzer, sparkling water, and then some bitters. I love to add orange bitters. You can also use whatever bitters you have on hand, like Angostura or Peshawts. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but any kind of bitters works. About 2 or 3 dashes. Adds like a nice little extra hint of flavor. And then the secret ingredient for this rosé spritzer is a little bit of blood orange. These came in our farm box this week and they're so beautiful. And they add a nice little hint of kind of citrus with like a little tart. This is not a sweet drink. I don't love sweet drinks, so I think this is really fun. It also adds great color. Look at that color dripping in there. And then we're gonna need a little wheel of blood orange that I'll drop in for garnish. And some ice. I'm just gonna stir it very briefly. If you can't find blood oranges, don't worry about it. You can use something like a clementine. And it works really well if you have chilled rosé and chilled seltzer. It makes the whole drink a little bit more cold, which is delicious. And there we have our blood orange rosé spritzer. Cheers. Yeah, it's a good one. Easy drinking for a Saturday evening. I'm gonna set this aside. And now, what goes better with a little cocktail hour than doing some watercolors to kind of calm yourself at the end of the day. These are the supplies I have. I have some water with a brush. I'm using a sort of roundish pointed brush that's number 1, so it's pretty small. And then I have a couple of napkins that I can blot my brush with. And then I have my watercolor set that you can see is very old and used. My favorite watercolor brand is Pelikan. P-E-L-I-K-A-N, and it's a palette of dry paints. You can also go for the little squeeze bottles of paint. I feel like that's like a little bit more of a professional way to go, but I just always love using the dry palette. I find it very quick and easy. So Pelikan, look for that. The other thing I love to use is cold pressed watercolor paper. It's the type of watercolor paper that has like just a little bit of texture. So I did a couple of these flowers already. And you can see when it dries, when the paint dries, it creates like a really nice texture. So look for cold press. The brand I'm using here is Strathmore for the watercolor paper. All right, so look at these beautiful ranunculus we got. How pretty are those? They're some of my favorite spring flowers. And we're gonna paint them. Shall we get started? I cut a piece of my paper into about, I don't know, it's around 5 by 7, and I thought it would be a nice Mother's Day card. So I'm gonna paint one of these beautiful pink ranunculus. So if you take a look at it, there's a lot of different angles we could paint it from, but I'm gonna go right from the side so that I can see these little green leaves that kind of envelop the blossom so nicely. And these, look at those cute little buds, and I really love the leaves on these. They're sort of spiky and different. So I'm gonna start by painting the green parts. So I'm gonna go into my palette and I'm gonna go for the sort of olivey green. If you don't have a few different shades of green in your palette, just maybe dip first in the green and then take a little yellow or brown to kind of mix the right color. And then put your flower right next to you so you can really get a sense of what it looks like. And I'm gonna start with these leaves on the side. I can see about 3 or 4 of them. So I'm gonna go with the outline first. And as I paint, I'm doing the outline with pretty wet paint. And remember, this doesn't have to be perfect. Watercolor is so unreliable, which makes it also really forgiving, which I like. It, you just never know what you're gonna get or how it's gonna dry, so embrace that. So I went back in with just a little bit of water, and I'm pulling the paint from the edges so that I can't see the edges too much. I might need a little bit more paint to blur the edges a bit, but my goal is to not see that outline I just made. I'm gonna go in for a little bit more paint, and notice that I'm just sort of like dabbing and pulling as I go. And I'm pulling towards the bottom. I like that there's a little bit of white space left there, but I'm gonna pull out the bottom just a little bit. I have a lot of water on my brush. I'm gonna pull it down to create the stem, and that's not quite dark enough for me, so I just dipped in my paint again, and I'm gonna pull right down on that stem to make it a little bit darker with more paint. And then looking at this, I see that I have a couple of stems coming out of the sides of the main stem, so I'm gonna go ahead and add those with these cute little buds on top. So I'm just looking at my real flower, having a sip of my cocktail as I go, and then I'm gonna add in these branches on the side. And notice that I'm working pretty quickly. It's because it dries quickly, so I like to keep working with it while the paint is wet. And also, these are kind of little doodles. They're not like really elaborate paintings. Just looking at the shape of some of these leaves, like look at this leaf right here. It's got all these jagged edges. It's really pretty. So I'm gonna just make a sort of shape with some jagged edges at the top. And notice that I keep going back to my palette, but I'm adding just a tiny bit of paint at the tip for these small details. And I'm gonna add these little buds. All right, I'm gonna add another bud on the other side for this one right here. There's just a hint of pink coming from the petals underneath, which we can add in a moment. I'm gonna add another leaf over here. I'm gonna grab one of these leaves right here to show you how some of the other ranunculus look, and the detail on the leaves right there. Aren't those pretty? Sort of spiky, spindly leaves. So you could really get detailed with this, but I think just having the idea of a few different little shoots coming out of a stem is all you need. Like, you don't have to overthink it, you know? Just like little small details as you go. All right, I'm gonna add one more little detail over here. It doesn't have to look right, you know, exactly like your example. Is sort of using it as inspiration, right? So this is still a little bit wet here at the top, but I'm gonna go back in for my pink. So I have two shades of pink on mine. And I'm gonna add just a little bit of the light pink and then a little bit of the dark pink. So I'm dipping first in my light pink and then the dark, and adding a little bit of water to get kind of a lot of water on my brush. And I'm gonna go back in, you can come back close, and I'm gonna add the pink petals. And from the side, I can just see sort of like little lines of the petals. They're really quite close together. So I'm gonna make those kind of outlines right around here. And it's okay if your brush touches the green, but you don't want it to touch too much because it'll bleed a lot. So I'm kind of avoiding the edges. I don't mind if it goes in a little bit, but I'm making sort of the outline of some of these petals. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Just sort of some curved lines to show the outline of these petals. And then I'm gonna go back in with some of the lighter pink. So I have a darker edge, but I'm adding just a little bit of light pink here underneath it to touch it. And notice I'm working quickly so that you don't see the outline so much. I like it when it's all wet and the colors start to blend together. So now I'm gonna just get a little bit of water on my brush, and I'm gonna dab it on my napkin so that it's not super wet, but now I'm just gonna use water to pull down the colors a little bit. So I can still see some of the white, but I'm just pulling the colors down a little bit. And I might, now that it's pretty wet, I might go back in with just a tiny bit of pink on the tip of my brush and add a little bit of like bleeding colors. You see how the colors start to bleed together because they're wet? And when that dries, it just looks so beautiful, the way the colors sort of start to unexpectedly blend together. I think that's the nice thing about watercolors, that it's always a surprise. You never know how it's gonna dry. And I think you do have to kind of just embrace and enjoy that. All right, so there we go. I think we have our little watercolor of our ranunculus. We have a rosé spritzer, and cheers, it's watercolor cocktail hour.